It's an interesting story. I was actually working on my PhD, which focused more on public administration and political issues than marketing per se. But I had a strong background in statistics and social science research. But while working on my PhD and completing it, I decided I needed something else to do during that process. And as part of that, I found this position at the ACSI that was open, began working here, and shortly thereafter completed my dissertation and my PhD, but decided that this was the job that I wanted to be in, an extremely dynamic and interesting kind of research with a lot of opportunities to do international travel because of ACSI's international presence. We do a lot of really exciting and interesting original research here at ACSI as well. So I've stuck with it and been here now for 17 years. Sure, and this goes back to really the founding of the ACSI and the group of researchers, specifically led by Professor Klaus Fornell. Some of the things that they thought about when they were designing and inventing, if you will, the American Customer Satisfaction Index. Particularly, Professor Fornell had long been interested in and focused on doing research related to consumer experience issues, customer relationship management, those kinds of things. Going back early in his career, focusing on consumer complaints and the relationship those had to companies' success or failure in the marketplace. But essentially, Professor Fornell and the folks that he worked with at the University of Michigan when they launched the ACSI were trying to design exactly what you're describing, a way to measure customer satisfaction, but to do it in a rigorous and quantifiable and reliable way. A lot of customer satisfaction research that was done before that point, and we're looking at the late 80s and early 1990s now, a lot of it was done in a way that simply wasn't rigorous, either from academic standards or even from just good market research standards. And so what they did was put together a system that allowed the measurement of customer satisfaction in a way that took into account all of the best practices from consumer survey research, psychology and psychometrics, economics and econometrics, even things like good consumer survey design, and put all of that together in a system that is just much better and more reliable at measuring customer satisfaction. And so it really does, as you say, sort of bridge that gap between the art or the qualitative and how individual consumers think psychologically and the quantitative or the more rigorous academic and scientific side that measures those less quantitative experiences and phenomena in a more quantitative way. Well, it works essentially because what we're measuring when we measure customer satisfaction is a bundle of consumer experiences that come together to form individual consumer satisfaction judgments. Those satisfaction judgments are driven by a variety of factors. In some cases, in some consumer experiences, it's a huge number of factors. In others, it's a fairly small number of factors. In commoditized goods, for instance, that really tend to be price-focused. Differences between suppliers tend to be minimal or non-existent. But what we do when we measure customer satisfaction is think of customer satisfaction as part of a series of relationships between items that influence satisfaction, or what we sometimes call drivers of satisfaction, and then outcomes of satisfaction, the key among those being consumer complaint behavior and customer loyalty. Customer satisfaction then ends up being, you can think of it as the total cumulative variable measuring the sum total of those experiences for consumers, including things like it's very strongly related to customer loyalty, for instance. That customer loyalty variable that we include in the ACSI model is in turn strongly related to actual future consumer behaviors. And so when you think about things like, even as simple as is the consumer going to speak positively about our company or a company in the future, that's going to be strongly related to loyalty and through that to customer satisfaction. And even more quantitatively, you can make a direct link, and we have in a lot of the research that we've done here, between customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, and hard variables like financial performance, profitability, market share, revenue growth, all of those kinds of things, stock market performance, of course, all of those things we've been able to link to customer satisfaction. And again, the reason why it works is because what we're picking up with customer satisfaction is overall what consumers think about individual companies and brands and how predisposed they are to like those things. That in turn drives what they'll really do in the future. Yeah, satisfaction is not a perfect predictor of economic behavior across all different industries. For instance, there's certain industries where consumers have little choice. If consumers have little choice, dissatisfaction cannot really be used to punish through things like disloyalty. If you're in a pure monopoly, people are highly dissatisfied with certain government agencies, the IRS, for instance. The IRS isn't a publicly traded company, so we can't see its stock market performance, but obviously it would probably not perform well. And coming up here in about a month or so, it would take a big dip in satisfaction as people start to file their taxes. Nevertheless, you can't punish the IRS by defecting. You can't say, I'm no longer going to be a customer of the IRS because I dislike your services. You are locked into experiencing those services unless you want to defect from the country, of course. In industries like that, for instance, where companies have a high degree of monopoly power or where there's very high switching costs, barriers to exit from one supplier to another, where there's a long-standing relationship between customers and a company, the kind of brand loyalty that makes switching less attractive, those kinds of things where there's a lot of friction involved in the economic exchange and in switching from supplier to supplier. Satisfaction is not as good a predictor of future market performance in terms of stock market performance. Essentially what we do when we do our statistical modeling, that type of modeling, as you mentioned, is called partial least squares structural equation modeling, is to take a large amount of data in the sense of a large number of consumer interviews and in a large number of variables measured during those consumer interviews and sort of congeal it down to the most important features and look at the relationships between those features. And so we end up measuring somewhere between 25 and 35 individual variables in our survey. That's a lot of data, and you need to be able to do something with that that makes sense, that gets rid of some kinds of statistical problems, that takes all of that data and puts it into a meaningful structure. To take multiple variables and put them into single, what we call latent variables, which are a composite of multiple variables, and then relate those latent variables to one another so that we can best understand what drives or predicts customer satisfaction, and then what customer satisfaction predicts in the future in terms of things like customer complaints and customer loyalty. So it's a really involved statistical process, but ultimately what it allows us to do is measure satisfaction in a way that's much more efficient and reliable than a lot of what you see out there in terms of both unprofessional market research and even a lot of professional market